On to the 2002. Again, I said in another video before that I know for sure they beefed up the 2002s because I'd gotten my hands on the ears on a lot of old 2002s. And again, in 1992 or 3, I ordered through Thoroughbred. What I did was I wanted to get to the bottom of the whole, just to get the bottom sound. At that time, I had no idea that whether I thought PAISTE made the cymbals heavier. But I found out firsthand, again, I said in another video, right, an 18-inch red label crash, and then an 18-inch heavy crash model they had at the time, an 18-inch medium and 18-inch ride. And I'll tell you, I sent the 18-inch ride and the 18-inch medium back. They were so heavy. Anyway, 2002. So now I'm talking about 2002s. There's interesting things about 2002s. I said my friend Bob, I have a friend named Bob who I turned on to 2002s. And I never noticed some of these things till he, what happened was he used to get a lot of these cymbals. I mean, I thought I was obsessive compulsive. But there came a time that he had a lot of the cymbals sent here because he lived kind of in a crappy neighborhood. So the cymbals would come here, so I'd open them. So I had a lot of cymbals come through my hands there. It's funny, sometimes you'll see, I don't think I ever saw it on 602s, but on 2002s, I've seen, I'm sure a lot of guys have, but it's my video, so I'm telling you. I've actually seen, you know, it says made in Switzerland, but there are some that will actually say made in Germany. And I've seen a bunch of them in different years. You know, I remember seeing like my friend, Bob, he had a 1974 18-inch medium that said made in Germany on it. So they didn't make them all in Switzerland. Maybe the demand was just so great they started making some in Germany too. So every so often you will see, if you look, I mean, if you're a collector and if you're like me and you're sort of obsessive compulsive, take a second look sometimes at your cymbals. Yeah, I'm sure there's got to be some red labels like that. They'll say made in Germany on them. Very rarely, but in any case, yeah. So the 2002s, I know they beefed them up. It's definitely through the early I think the heaviest time for 2002s was by the time the 90s came with hair metal and stuff. But 2002s are just great cymbals. Again, I always felt with B8 alloy, it sounds better from a slight distance. Hence, like with Bottom and some of these bands, you know, big drummers that were, you know, popularly known for playing 2002s were like, well, Nick Mason. It's funny in the Pompeii movie, Live at Pompeii, where they're filming out there, you can see giant beats galore. He's playing giant beats that whole time. It's pretty cool. In the 1973 and 75 Ludwig catalogs, you can see giant beats. If you look through, you can see giant beats on the drums. But anyway, back to 2002s. They sound better, I think, recorded from a distance. So like with the ambient miking and stuff, you know, the 2002s will sound like I always felt like B20 alloy, especially Zildjians and Sabians, sound great up close, like for jazz, like an acoustic setting. But as you get further away, it's not that they sound worse. I mean, they sound good if you're playing jazz, but in like rock and roll, like with loud guitar stuff, when you get further away, they don't, you know, as PAISTE would say, they don't cut through, but it's really not even so much that. I mean, as part of it, it's just that they don't sound, you know, the perceived pitch of something, I think, falls from the further away you get from it, you know, because the waves get further apart. So PAISTE B8 alloy, even though like this is a PST5, this is a modern day lower line PAISTE B8 cymbal, but it sounds great. I mean, B8 alloy, in my opinion, B8 alloy, no matter what it is, even if it's a ZBT or a ZXT Zildjian or a B8 or a B8 Pro or a what else did those guys make? I mean, the Prosonics and all that stuff that Sabian and Zildjian made. They sound great. I remember one time there was a Led Zeppelin band I played with called Presence. God rest Lou Caruso. But I played with those guys, and I had sold Lou a drum set, and in that set there was a 20-inch ZBT. A B8 alloy 20-inch ride, which was very sewer cappy. Anyway, so the fellow who was playing with him at the time when they were playing up on stage, he used this ride that I'd sold Lou with this other kid. I forget what it was. And he was hitting it, and I mean, it was beautiful. I mean, from 60 feet away, psh, I mean, if you were standing 10 feet from it, it would have been like, oh my God, that thing's so heavy and brash and sewer cap. But from 60 feet away, the thing was, psh, it was beautiful. So that's, to me, the nature of B8 alloy. Is it sounds better from a distance. I mean, you get used to it up close. And actually, I mean, it sounds good up close. I mean, the better ones that are made, like 2002s and 505s and stuff, and the 404s, they sound better up close. I mean, they're different than B20. But even like crappy, heavy B8 alloy cymbals, from a distance will sound great. Anyway, and it is funny. I always felt, again, with PAISTE, they got rid of the. So I felt like they got rid of this 602 alloy because Zildjian and Sabian used to kind of crap all over PAISTE for making sheet. Again, they used to roll the alloy out and then cut the shapes and then make the symbols from there. As again, opposed to Zildjian, who would have the big vat of molten bronze and then pour like chips, and then each one they individually make. Anyway, so the 2002s, they discontinued in 1986, and then they went to the 1000, 2000, 3000. And then, of course, there were lower, more budget lines, 200 and 400. The 200 were brass, and the 400 were bronze. They were B8, but they were real heavy, and they had that really big hammering, again, I mentioned before. And then the 1000s sort of replaced the 404s roughly, because they got rid of the 404s and 505s. 505s more or less were replaced by the 2000s, and also a little bit of the 2002s, because the 3000s weren't necessarily a direct replacement. I think it was sort of like, obviously, the new and improved. So some aspects of the 2002s, I think, went into the 2000s as well. 2000s are great cymbals. They're actually almost, to me, identical to 505s in that the lathing is evenly spaced. Like, they kind of really do look almost identical. So I think maybe the 2000s is slightly better made, or at least as far as PAISTE goes, to 505, but also with a lot more models. They offered 2000s a pretty wide array. You could get like 13-inch sound edge hats, 14-inch sound edge hats, 15-inch sound edge hats, and medium hats, heavy hats, and the 2000s. But then they also too, in the early 80s, they came out. PAISTE came out with the Rude series, which was an unlathed 2002. And again, I mentioned in another video the Color Sound 5, which was essentially a colored 2002. But with it's funny, I've seen the 400 series, actually, that budget B8, I saw Color Sound 400s. I'm sure I did. I don't have any pictures. I never owned any. Maybe it was just a couple colors. But then there were also, I think the 2000s were also offered Color Sound. So after the Color Sound 5 were gone, if you want a Color Sound symbol, I think it was a 2000 that would be colored. And a 500. And I also saw 900 series. The 500 and the 900 series were paired symbols for marching, or I don't know, for orchestra or whatever. And I know I saw some 900s that were colored as well, maybe in 500s. So the 400s I know were colored. The 2000s, the 3000s, I don't think you get colored. Anyway, so they did that. PAISTE had that gimmick too. For a while, God love them. And then. But then also, too, there were 1,000 Rudes, and they had green ink. Like, the 1,000s had green ink, the 2000s had blue ink, and then the 3000s had red ink, like the 2002s. But the 2000s, again, were great cymbals. When the 2000s and 3000s first came out, they were lathed a lot like the 505s. The 2000s were lathed a lot like the 505s. The 3000s were lathed a lot like the 2002s, but a little different. They had sort of what I call like ribbon lathing, where it looked like because of the hammering, or if they pushed down a little, like some of these secondary lathes would get wider and thinner and wider and thinner and wider and thinner. And you saw that really a lot when they came out the signatures in '89. That was kind of the trademark. And also too, the signatures around that time, like '88, '89, PAISTE changed the 2000s and the 3000s. Maybe not so much the 2000s, but definitely the 3000s. They changed the production slightly, where they were slightly more polished. Like if you see an original 3000 from like '86, it looks different than one from '89. It had, like you see in these modern PAISTE, see how that's like a shinier symbol, like it's more glossy. They changed that in about '88. You'll see, like, I mean, I know guys don't talk about that, but I'm telling you, I've seen a lot of symbols. You'll see the pre-change and the post-change. The 3000s before they actually look more kind of, you know what it is? It's kind of like the difference. If anyone remembers the sound formulas versus the signatures. The sound formulas were, and I don't mention the sound creations on here. The 602s really. I mean, I like the symbols. I want to say like a bright medium, which was cool, but I don't know a lot about those. I've seen a bunch of them, but I never played a lot of them, so I don't really talk about. But anyway, so the sound formulas, which they essentially took the old sound formula logo, made sound, or sound creation logo, made sound formula. The sound formula and the signature are like a B12 alloy. I don't know if it's B12, I assume it is, but it's sort of Not as much copper as the B8, but more copper than the Zildjian, than the B20. But if you look at the original sound formula, were like, they had a very tight lathing, not quite like this, but the original, to me, the original sound formula were awesome cymbals. They were great. I mean, and I think Paiste, they ultimately stopped making them because I think they felt like they were cannibalizing the signatures, which were the top of the line. Anyway, with the signatures, you really saw the production techniques, this real polished looking cymbal with that kind of lathing that, you know, the later 3000s had. And then, of course, they switched the sound formulas over to that type of production, too. So not only did the logo change from the round logo, but from like less of a polished... The sound formulas changed dramatically. In fact, stand by. Stand by, people. All right. Okay. This is kind of what I'm talking about. This is an original, you see, sound formula. Okay? See how it's lathed more, it's not quite, like I was saying, like this. But it's lathed, you know, it's not as brightly polished. It's lathed, there's not really any secondary grooves. There kind of are. It's lathed a little more like a, I don't know what Paiste cymbal is more like. Maybe more like a Zildjian, you know, sort of like just a regular lathing. But beautiful. So this is a power crash. Again, B12, but let me show you. Since I don't have a production person to help me, I got to run over here. Again. All right, this is what they call the Frankenstein sound formula. Wow. So you'll see the difference. Now this is a hand. This is a marching cymbal. This is actually a beautiful sounding cymbal. But you'll see the Frankenstein-y. They switched in about 88 or 89 to these cymbals. They changed the production technique. I think it was the lathing to a different kind of lathing. So see how that's more of like that polished-y look, which you see on a lot of their cymbals now. So they didn't just change the logo, they actually changed, I mean, I'll show you, you can see the difference. What the hell did I do with that cymbal, folks? Okay, so the original to the change. And again, this kind of thing happened with the 3000s as well. The original 3000s were more like this, and then about 80 or 89 they sort of switched to this more polished. Again, it's not so much, I think it's the lathing they use. You can, I don't know if you can see the difference. But so here, I'll hold that there for a minute. You can see my shakes. To this. Okay, now the signatures when they come out were always like this. Okay? And then when they did the traditionals that came out a little later, like the more jazz with the etched-in logo, they kind of went, the traditional's kind of funny, kind of go back to this more standard, older lathing. But my better lathing to me, kind of. But anyway, so this is what I mean by the more polished lathing, which then the 3000s took on. And then, of course, the traditionals, and but anyway, of course, too, with the let me see how much time we have left here. Holy moly! I almost died. I can't see anything here. 18. All right, we're gonna make this a different part. So we're gonna make another video.